I'm Emma Rodriguez, 17 years old, and for the past 3 years, my stepmother Victoria has been an artist. Not with paintbrushes or canvases, but with concealer, foundation, and carefully applied powder that could hide the evidence of what really happened behind the closed doors of our pristine suburban home in Maplewood Heights. I'd love to know which corner of the globe you're watching from. And if this story speaks to you, make sure to subscribe. Tomorrow's video is one you absolutely can't miss. Every morning before school, Victoria would sit me down at her vanity table in the master bathroom, her manicured fingers working with the precision of a surgeon. A dab of green color corrector here to neutralize the purple around my left eye. A layer of full coverage foundation there to mask the finger-shaped bruises on my upper arm. Powder to set everything in place, followed by a spritz of setting spray to ensure it would last through the entire school day. There, she would say, stepping back to admire her handiwork. Perfect. Remember, Emma, what happens in our family stays in our family. We protect each other's reputations. Our family's reputation was everything to Victoria. She had married my father, Marcus Rodriguez, 2 years after my mother died in a car accident when I was 12. Marcus owned a successful chain of auto dealerships across 3 counties, and Victoria came from old money, the kind of family that had their names engraved on hospital wings and university buildings. Together, they were Maplewood Heights power couple, photographed at charity galas, featured in the lifestyle section of the local newspaper, always impeccably dressed and radiating success. From the outside, we looked like the American dream was realized. Our house was a sprawling colonial on Elm Street, complete with perfectly manicured lawns, a circular driveway, and seasonal decorations that Victoria changed with military precision. Inside, every room was magazine-worthy, decorated in neutral tones with expensive furniture that no one was actually allowed to use comfortably. My father had been different before Victoria. When it was just him and me after Mom died, he was gentle, attentive, present. We would order pizza on Friday nights and watch old movies together. He helped me with homework at the kitchen table, listened to my middle school drama with genuine interest, and never once raised his voice to me, let alone his hand. But Victoria brought structure to his life, she said. Organization. Elevated. Social standing. She helped him see that a man of his position needed to present a certain image to the community. Discipline was part of that image, especially when it came to raising a teenage daughter who had been allowed to run wild for too long. The first time Victoria hit me was 3 months after the wedding. I had accidentally knocked over an expensive vase while rushing to answer the phone. It shattered across the marble foyer, pieces scattering in every direction. When Victoria saw the destruction, her face transformed from its usual composed mask into something cold and furious. "You clumsy little fool," she hissed, her hand connecting with my cheek so fast I didn't see it coming. The slap echoed through the house, leaving my face stinging and my ears ringing. "Do you have any idea how much that cost? That was a family heirloom." I stood there in shock, touching my burning cheek, unable to process what had just happened. When my father came home that evening, Victoria had already spun the story. I had been careless and destructive, she explained, and she had simply provided the correction I needed. Children who grew up without proper discipline, she told him, often struggle to understand the value of beautiful things. My father looked at me with disappointment rather than concern. "Emma, you need to be more careful. Victoria has worked hard to make this house a home for all of us." That was the beginning of my education in the Rodriguez family's new dynamics. Victoria's discipline escalated gradually, each incident carefully calculated to leave marks in places that wouldn't be visible in my school clothes. A hard grip on my upper arm that left finger-shaped bruises. A shove against the wall that resulted in a bruised shoulder blade. A yank of my hair that left my scalp tender for days, but it was the psychological manipulation that proved most effective. Victoria had a gift for making me feel responsible for every incident. If I hadn't been so careless, so disrespectful, so ungrateful for everything she and my father provided, none of it would have happened. She was simply trying to help me become the kind of daughter a man like my father deserved. "Your mother clearly didn't teach you proper respect before she died," Victoria would say during her corrections. "But I won't let you embarrass this family with your behavior." My father's transformation was perhaps the most painful part of the entire situation. The man who had once comforted me through nightmares and celebrated my small victories became distant, distracted, more concerned with maintaining Victoria's approval than protecting his own daughter. When I tried to tell him about Victoria's punishments, he would dismiss my concerns as teenage drama or exaggeration. "Victoria loves you like her own daughter," he would say without looking up from his phone. "She's just trying to help you reach your potential. You should be grateful someone cares enough to invest in your future." School became my refuge, the one place where I could almost forget about the tension that permeated every moment at home. I threw myself into my studies, maintaining a perfect GPA that made my father proud and gave Victoria fewer reasons to find fault with my behavior. I joined the debate team, volunteered at the local animal shelter, and kept my head down in the hallways, but even at school, Victoria's influence followed me. She had cultivated relationships with several teachers and administrators, positioning herself as a concerned stepmother who was working tirelessly to help a troubled teenager adjust to life after loss. When I occasionally showed up to school with a bruise that makeup couldn't completely hide, Victoria had already laid the groundwork for alternative explanations. "Emma's still processing her mother's death," she would tell anyone who expressed concern. "She can be quite clumsy when she's distracted, and she's been acting out at home. We're working with her to develop better coping strategies." The lies came so easily to her, delivered with such apparent sincerity, that even I sometimes wondered if I was remembering things correctly. Victoria had a way of rewriting history in real time, making me question my own experiences and perceptions. Mrs. Chen, my AP history teacher, noticed my flinching when she handed back graded papers. Mr. Williams, my chemistry teacher, saw how I carefully positioned my sleeves to cover my wrists and forearms. My guidance counselor, Ms. Patterson, observed how I ate lunch alone and seemed to shrink into myself more each passing month, but Victoria's reputation preceded me everywhere. She was known throughout the school district as a devoted stepmother who had generously taken on the challenge of raising another woman's child. She volunteered for the PDA, donated generously to school fundraisers, and always presented herself as deeply invested in my educational success. The makeup routine became our shared secret, though the secrecy was enforced entirely through fear. Every morning, Victoria would transform me from a victim into the picture of a well-cared-for teenager. She taught me which products worked best for different types of bruises, how to blend colors seamlessly, and how to apply everything in thin layers that wouldn't cake or crack throughout the day. "This is just another life skill," she would say as she worked. "Presentation is everything in this world, Emma. The sooner you learn that, the better off you'll be." I learned to sit perfectly still during these morning sessions, watching Victoria's face in the mirror as she concentrated on her work. Sometimes I caught glimpses of something almost maternal in her expression, a careful attention that might have been love if the circumstances had been different. But then she would catch me staring and her mask would slip back into place. "Stop making that face," she would snap. "You look pathetic when you do that." The isolation was perhaps worse than the physical abuse. Victoria systematically cut me off from potential sources of support, monitoring my phone calls, restricting my social activities, and cultivating an image of herself as a concerned parent dealing with a difficult child. Old friends from before the marriage gradually drifted away, discouraged by Victoria's subtle interventions and my own increasing withdrawal. At 17, I felt ancient and exhausted, carrying secrets that seemed too heavy for my small frame. I had learned to anticipate Victoria's moods, to read the warning signs in her posture and tone of voice, to make myself invisible when necessary. I had become an expert at minimizing damage, both physical and emotional, but I had also learned something else during those 3 years of careful concealment and calculated submission. I had learned that adults could fail children in spectacular ways, that beautiful houses could hide ugly truths, and that sometimes the people who were supposed to protect you were the ones you most needed protection from. What I hadn't learned yet was that some people see through makeup and lies with remarkable clarity. Some people are trained to notice what others miss, to ask the right questions, and to act when action is needed. I was about to meet one of those people, though I didn't know it yet. All I knew was that Victoria's morning routine was becoming more time-consuming, requiring heavier coverage and more careful application. The bruises were getting harder to hide, and Victoria was running out of excuses for my increasing clumsiness. Something was going to have to change soon. I just didn't realize that the change would come from an unexpected source, someone who had been watching and waiting for the right moment to act. The incident that would ultimately unravel Victoria's carefully constructed facade happened on a Tuesday morning in October. I had overslept, which in the Rodriguez household was considered a form of insubordination. Victoria's schedule was rigid and unforgiving, built around maintaining appearances and maximizing her control over every aspect of our daily routine. "Emma." Her voice cut through my bedroom door like a blade. "You were supposed to be downstairs 15 minutes ago." I jolted awake, immediately assessing my situation. The digital clock beside my bed glowed 6:47 a.m., 13 minutes past my designated wake-up time. My stomach dropped as I heard Victoria's heels clicking against the hardwood floors, growing closer to my room with each passing second. She burst through my door without knocking, her face already twisted into that familiar expression of controlled fury that made my blood run cold. Victoria was dressed for her morning yoga class, wearing expensive athletic wear that probably cost more than most people's monthly rent. Her blonde hair was pulled back in a perfect ponytail, and her makeup was flawless even at this early hour. "Do you have any idea how this affects the entire household schedule?" she demanded, striding toward my bed. "Your father has an important client meeting this morning, and now everything is thrown off because you can't manage the simple task of waking up on time." I scrambled to sit up, my heart already racing with the familiar cocktail of fear and adrenaline that Victoria's presence always triggered. "I'm sorry, I set my alarm, but I think my phone died overnight. I don't want to hear your excuses." Victoria's voice was deadly quiet now, which was always more dangerous than when she yelled. "Get up now." I threw back my covers and swung my legs over the side of the bed, but apparently I wasn't moving fast enough for Victoria's liking. She grabbed my upper arm and yanked me to my feet with a force that sent shooting pain through my shoulder socket. "When I tell you to move, you move," she hissed, her grip tightening around my bicep. "I've spent 3 years trying to teach you basic respect and responsibility, and you're still acting like an entitled little princess." The pain in my arm was intense, but I had learned not to cry out. Any sign of weakness or complaint would only make things worse. Instead, I focused on staying upright as Victoria dragged me toward my closet, her fingernails digging into my skin through my pajama sleeve. "You'll wear the navy blazer today," she commanded, releasing my arm abruptly. "And you'll apologize to your father for disrupting his morning. Maybe if you actually cared about this family's success instead of just taking advantage of it, you'd understand how your selfishness affects everyone else." I nodded quickly, rubbing my throbbing arm. "Yes, ma'am. I'll hurry." Victoria studied my face with the calculating expression she wore when planning her makeup strategy. "You look terrible. We'll need extra concealer this morning to hide the bags under your eyes. I won't have you going to school looking like some neglected street child." The irony of her statement wasn't lost on me, but I had learned long ago not to point out Victoria's contradictions. Instead, I focused on getting dressed as quickly as possible while she supervised, critiquing my choice of accessories and the way I tucked in my shirt. A lot of love and effort went into bringing this story to life. If you're enjoying it, we'd be so grateful if you'd subscribe to our channel. Now, back to where we left off. 20 minutes later, we were in the master bathroom for the daily makeup ritual. Victoria worked with her usual efficiency, but I could tell she was still angry from the way she applied the products with slightly more pressure than necessary. The concealer stung when she dabbed it over the fresh finger marks on my arm, but I held perfectly still. "There," she said finally, stepping back to examine her work. "You look almost human now. Remember, you have that student council meeting after school today, so you'll be home late. I expect you to go straight to your room and work on homework. No dawdling, no unnecessary socializing." I nodded obediently, gathering my backpack and textbooks. The weight of my AP Literature anthology seemed heavier than usual, or maybe it was just the cumulative exhaustion of maintaining this charade day after day, month after month. The drive to school was silent except for the classical music Victoria preferred. She dropped me off at the front entrance with her usual parting words: "Remember who you represent when you walk through those doors." The Rodriguez name means something in this community. Maplewood High School was a sprawling brick complex that housed nearly 2,000 students from across the district. I had been attending for 3 years, and in many ways, it felt more like home than the house on Elm Street. Here, I could disappear into the crowd, lose myself in academic challenges, and pretend to be just another normal teenager dealing with normal problems. My first period was AP Chemistry with Mr. Williams, a kind man in his 50s who had a talent for making complex formulas seem manageable. I slipped into my usual seat in the third row, carefully arranging my sleeves to ensure full coverage of my arms. The classroom was filling up with other early arrivals, all of us going through the motions of normalcy before the school day officially began. "Morning, Emma," called Jessica Chen from across the room. She was one of the few classmates who still made an effort to include me in conversations, despite my increasing withdrawal from social activities. "Did you finish the lab report on chemical equilibrium?" "Yes," I replied, managing a smile. "It's due today, right?" "Third period," Jessica confirmed, sliding into the seat beside me. I was up until midnight trying to balance those equations. Sometimes I think Mr. Williams secretly enjoys watching us suffer. I laughed softly, and for a moment, the familiar comfort of academic discussion almost made me forget about the tender bruises hidden beneath my blazer. The morning progressed normally through chemistry and advanced placement history. I took detailed notes, participated in class discussions when called upon, and maintained the facade of being an engaged, successful student. It was easier than people might think, this performance of normalcy. After 3 years of practice, I had become an expert at compartmentalizing my life into distinct Non-overlapping spheres, but it was during lunch that things began to unravel. I was sitting alone in the cafeteria, working on calculus homework while picking at a turkey sandwich, when I felt someone watching me. I looked up to see Marcus Thompson, a junior who played on the varsity basketball team, staring at me with a concerned expression. "Hey, Emma," he said, approaching my table hesitantly. "Can I sit down?" I nodded, curious about why Marcus would want to talk to me. We had exchanged maybe a dozen words in the past 2 years, despite being in the same English class last semester. "This might sound weird," he began, settling into the chair across from me, "but are you okay? You seem really tired lately, and you're always eating lunch alone." The question caught me off guard. Most of my classmates had learned to give me space, interpreting my withdrawal as a preference for solitude rather than a necessary survival strategy. Marcus's directness was both refreshing and terrifying. "I'm fine," I said automatically, the response that had become second nature. "Just busy with college applications and AP classes." Marcus studied my face with an intensity that made me uncomfortable. He had the kind of observant eyes that seemed to see more than they should, and I found myself wanting to shrink away from his attention. "My mom works for Child Protective Services," he said quietly, glancing around to make sure no one was listening. "She's taught me to notice things that other people might miss. Emma, if you ever need someone to talk to, or if there's anything going on at home that you can't handle alone." "Nothing's going on at home," I interrupted, my voice sharper than I intended. "My family is fine. We're perfectly fine." The words sounded hollow even to my own ears, but Marcus didn't push. He simply nodded and pulled out his own lunch, changing the subject to our upcoming English exam. But I could feel him watching me throughout the rest of the lunch period, and I knew that my defensive reaction had probably confirmed rather than dismissed his suspicions. After lunch, I had a free period that I usually spent in the library. It was a quiet sanctuary where I could work on assignments without the social pressures of the cafeteria or study hall. Mrs. Rodriguez, the head librarian, had become something of a protective figure over the past year, always ensuring I had a quiet corner table and access to any research materials I needed. I was deep in research for my AP history paper on the Industrial Revolution when I felt a tap on my shoulder. I looked up to see Nurse Patricia Hoffman standing beside my table, her expression calm but attentive. "Emma, could I see you in my office for a moment?" she asked quietly. "It won't take long." My heart immediately began racing. In 3 years at Maplewood High, I had never been called to the nurse's office unless I was genuinely sick. Nurse Hoffman was known throughout the school for her no-nonsense approach and her ability to see through student attempts at skipping class by faking illness. "Am I in trouble?" I asked, gathering my books with hands that were suddenly unsteady. "Not at all," Nurse Hoffman assured me, her voice gentle but professional. "I just want to check in with you about a few things." We walked through the hallways in silence, past clusters of students heading to their next classes. The nurse's office was located near the main administrative area, a small but well-organized space that smelled of antiseptic and had motivational posters covering most of the available wall space. Nurse Hoffman gestured for me to sit in the chair beside her desk while she settled into her own seat. She was a woman in her early 40s with graying brown hair and the kind of steady presence that immediately made people feel safe. Her office was filled with small personal touches, photos of her family, a small plant on the windowsill, and a coffee mug that read, "World's Okayest Nurse." "Emma," she began, her voice careful and measured, "I've been observing some changes in your behavior and appearance over the past few months. As the school nurse, it's my responsibility to check in with students when I notice patterns that concern me." I felt my carefully constructed defenses rising immediately. This was exactly the kind of attention that Victoria had trained me to deflect and discourage. "I don't understand what you mean." "I feel fine." Nurse Hoffman nodded, as if she had expected this response. "I'm sure you do feel fine most of the time. But I've noticed that you seem to flinch when people touch you unexpectedly. You're very careful about how you position your clothes and how you move. And sometimes, your makeup seems a bit heavier than what most teenagers your age typically wear." Each observation hit me like a physical blow. I had thought I was being so careful, so inconspicuous. The realization that someone had been watching and noting these details filled me with a mixture of terror and something that might have been relief. "I don't know what you're implying," I said carefully, "but there's nothing wrong with my appearance or my behavior. Some people are just more careful about how they present themselves." "You're absolutely right," Nurse Hoffman agreed. "And there's nothing wrong with taking care of your appearance. But Emma, in my experience, when teenagers feel the need to be extremely careful about their presentation every single day, there's usually a reason behind it." She leaned forward slightly, her eyes never leaving my face. "I've been a school nurse for 15 years. I've seen a lot of different situations, worked with a lot of different families. Sometimes students need extra support at home, and sometimes that support looks different from what outsiders might expect. The careful phrasing of her words made it clear that she suspected something without directly accusing anyone. This was dangerous territory, the kind of conversation that could destroy everything Victoria had worked so hard to build. But at the same time, there was something about Nurse Hoffman's steady, non-judgmental presence that made me want to tell her everything. "My family is very supportive," I said, reciting the script Victoria had drilled into me. "My stepmother especially has helped me a lot since my mother died. She's taught me about presentation and responsibility and how to represent our family well in the community." "I'm sure she has," Nurse Hoffman said quietly. "Your stepmother has quite a reputation in this town for her involvement in community activities. She seems very dedicated to your family's public image." There was something in the way she emphasized the words, public image, that made me look at her more closely. Her expression remained neutral, but I sensed that she was choosing her words very deliberately. "Emma," she continued, "I want you to know that anything you tell me in this office is confidential unless you're in immediate danger. My job is to make sure students are healthy and safe, not to judge families or create problems where none exist." The offer of confidentiality was tempting, but I knew better than to trust it completely. Adults had failed me before, and Victoria had connections throughout the school district. But something about Nurse Hoffman's steady presence made me want to believe that maybe, just maybe, someone might actually listen. "I appreciate your concern," I said finally, "but I really am fine. Is there anything else you needed to discuss?" Nurse Hoffman studied me for a long moment, and I could see her making calculations behind her calm exterior. "Just one more thing," she said, reaching into her desk drawer. "I'm going to give you my direct phone number. Not the school number, but my personal cell phone." She handed me a small card with her name and number written in neat handwriting. "If you ever need to talk to someone, day or night, you can call me. Sometimes situations change quickly, and it's good to know that help is available when you need it." I took the card, my hands trembling slightly. The simple gesture felt both dangerous and hopeful, like being offered a lifeline that I wasn't sure I was brave enough to grab. "Thank you," I managed to say. "But I'm sure I won't need it." "I hope you're right," Nurse Hoffman replied. "But keep it anyway. Sometimes we don't know we need help until we really need it." As I walked back to the library, the card felt like it was burning a hole in my pocket. For the first time in 3 years, someone had offered me a way out, a potential escape from the suffocating control that had become my normal. But taking that step would mean acknowledging that something was wrong, and after years of Victoria's careful conditioning, I wasn't sure I was ready to admit that truth, even to myself. The rest of the school day passed in a blur of equations and essay questions, but I couldn't stop thinking about Nurse Hoffman's careful words and steady gaze. Something had shifted during our conversation, some small crack in the perfect facade that Victoria had worked so hard to maintain. I didn't know it yet, but that crack was about to become a chasm. The card from Nurse Hoffman remained hidden in my calculus textbook for 2 weeks, a secret talisman that I would touch during particularly difficult moments at home. I never seriously considered using it, but knowing it existed gave me a strange sense of comfort, like having a fire escape in a burning building that you hope you'll never need to use. Victoria's behavior became increasingly erratic after my meeting with the nurse, though I didn't realize at first that the two events were connected. She had always been controlling, but now her supervision took on an almost paranoid quality. She began checking my backpack every evening, claiming she wanted to help me stay organized for my college applications. She monitored my phone calls more closely and started picking me up from school herself instead of allowing me to take the bus home. "I've been thinking," she announced one evening as we sat at the dinner table, picking at another one of her Pinterest perfect meals. "You've been spending too much time at school with extracurricular activities. It's important to maintain balance." My father looked up from his phone, where he'd been scrolling through emails throughout most of the meal. "What activities?" I thought Emma was focusing on academics. "Student council, debate team, volunteer work at the animal shelter," Victoria listed off, her tone suggesting these were character flaws rather than achievements. "She's spread too thin. It's affecting her focus at home." This was news to me. My involvement in school activities had actually decreased over the past year as Victoria's control tightened, but I had managed to maintain a few commitments that provided me with legitimate reasons to stay at school longer. "But my college applications," I began, only to be cut off by Victoria's raised hand. "Your college applications will be stronger if you can demonstrate depth rather than breadth," she said smoothly. "Quality over quantity. I think you should resign from the student council and limit your other commitments." My father nodded absently, already returning his attention to his phone. "Whatever you think is best, Victoria. You understand these things better than I do." That night, as I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, I realized that Victoria was systematically eliminating my connections to the outside world. The student council resignation would remove me from a group of engaged, observant peers. Reducing my time at the animal shelter would eliminate my interaction with Mrs. Patterson, the volunteer coordinator who had become something of a mentor. Victoria was tightening her grip, and I was running out of safe spaces. The breaking point came 3 days later, during what should have been a routine evening at home. I had finished my homework and was reading in the living room when Victoria discovered that I had forgotten to empty the dishwasher after school. It was a minor oversight, the kind of thing that might have earned a gentle reminder in a normal household, but our household was anything but normal. "Emma," Victoria's voice echoed from the kitchen, carrying that particular tone that made my stomach clench with dread. "Could you come here, please?" I set down my book and walked to the kitchen, already running through possible explanations and apologies in my mind. Victoria was standing beside the still full dishwasher, her arms crossed and her expression thunderous. "Would you like to explain to me why this wasn't done?" she asked, her voice deceptively calm. "I'm sorry," I said immediately. "I had that calculus test to study for, and I just forgot. I can do it right now." "You forgot?" Victoria repeated the words as if they were personally offensive to her. "You forgot your basic responsibilities to this household because of a test. Do you think your father and I work all day so that you can simply forget your obligations?" "No, ma'am. It won't happen again." "You're right," Victoria said quietly, stepping closer to me. "It won't happen again. Because clearly, you need a reminder about the importance of following through on commitments." What happened next was worse than usual, not because the physical violence was more severe, but because it lasted longer and felt more deliberate. Victoria didn't just hit me, she delivered what she called a comprehensive lesson about responsibility and respect. By the time it was over, I had new bruises on my ribs, a split lip, and finger marks around my throat that no amount of makeup could completely disguise. "Clean this up," Victoria commanded, gesturing toward the kitchen where a glass had been broken during the altercation. "And then go to your room. We'll discuss your attitude problem more in the morning." I spent that night applying ice to my injuries and practicing cover-up techniques with the makeup supplies Victoria kept in my bathroom for emergencies. But as I looked at myself in the mirror, I realized that the bruises on my neck were too dark and too distinctively shaped to hide completely. Victoria's hands had left clear finger marks that would be visible no matter how much concealer I applied. The next morning's makeup session was more intensive than usual. Victoria worked with the focused determination of an artist preparing for a crucial exhibition, layering products and testing different application techniques. But even her considerable skills couldn't completely erase the evidence of what had happened. "You'll need to wear a turtleneck today," she decided finally, stepping back to assess her work. "And a scarf. If anyone asks, tell them you're fighting off a cold and trying to keep your throat warm." The turtleneck was uncomfortable and suspicious looking in the October heat, but I had no choice. Victoria drove me to school herself that morning, reminding me twice about the cold story before I got out of the car. "Remember," she said as I gathered my backpack, "what happens in our family stays in our family. People don't understand the kind of discipline required to raise a successful child." I nodded and walked toward the school entrance, hyper-aware of the weight of the scarf around my neck and the way the turtleneck felt like a prison uniform. Several classmates gave me curious looks as I made my way to first period, but I kept my head down and avoided eye contact. The morning passed without incident until third period, when I had to remove my scarf to dissect a frog in biology class. Mrs. Henderson had strict hygiene rules about loose clothing and accessories during lab work, and there was no way to avoid complying without drawing even more attention. I tried to position myself at the back of the classroom, hoping that my lab partner wouldn't notice anything unusual. But Jake Morrison, the boy I'd been paired with for the semester, was unfortunately observant. "Whoa, Emma," he said quietly as we prepared our specimens. "What happened to your neck?" I touched the area automatically, forgetting that the makeup there was probably lighter than Victoria's usual work. "Nothing. I just scratched myself in my sleep." Jake frowned, leaning closer to get a better look. "Those look like finger marks. Are you sure you're okay?" "I'm fine," I said quickly, pulling the neck of my turtleneck higher. "Can we just focus on the lab, please?" But Jake's concern had been loud enough to attract Mrs. Henderson's attention. She approached our table with the casual air of a teacher checking on student progress, but I could see her eyes scanning my appearance with professional interest. "How are we doing over here?" she asked, glancing between Jake and me. "Any questions about the circulatory system?" "No questions," I replied quickly, hoping to deflect her attention back to the academic material, but Mrs. Henderson's gaze lingered on my neck area, and I saw recognition flash in her eyes. She had obviously noticed what Jake had seen, and unlike A 17-year-old boy, she understood the implications immediately. Emma, she said carefully, could you stay after class for a moment? I'd like to discuss your upcoming research paper with you. The rest of the period dragged by with agonizing slowness. I could feel Mrs. Henderson watching me from across the room, and I knew that staying after class would mean facing questions I wasn't prepared to answer. When the bell finally rang, my classmates filed out while I remained at my lab station, my hands shaking as I cleaned up our materials. Close the door, please, Mrs. Henderson said once we were alone. I did as she asked, then returned to stand beside her desk. She was a woman in her 30s with 2 young children of her own, and I had always appreciated her patient teaching style and genuine concern for her students' well-being. Emma, she began gently, I noticed some marks on your neck during lab today. I'm concerned about what might have caused them. I told Jake, I scratched myself in my sleep, I said automatically. Sometimes I have allergic reactions to things. Mrs. Henderson nodded slowly, but her expression remained troubled. Those marks look very much like finger impressions to me. As a mandated reporter, I'm required to follow up on any signs that a student might be experiencing harm at home. The term mandated reporter sent a chill through me. Victoria had mentioned it before during her lectures about the importance of maintaining our family's privacy. Teachers, doctors, and other professionals were legally required to report suspected abuse, which was why it was so crucial that I never give them any reason for suspicion. There's no harm happening at home, I said firmly. My family is very supportive. My stepmother has worked really hard to help me adjust after my mother's death. I'm sure she has, Mrs. Henderson replied. But Emma, supporting a child doesn't typically leave physical marks. I'd like you to speak with our guidance counselor, and possibly with Nurse Hoffman as well. Is that required? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Given what I've observed today, yes, it is, Mrs. Henderson said gently. I'm going to call down to the nurse's office right now. This isn't about getting anyone in trouble, Emma. It's about making sure you're safe. As Mrs. Henderson reached for her phone, I felt the careful structure of my life beginning to collapse around me. Victoria's makeup artistry, her story explanations, her reputation management, all of it was about to be scrutinized by professionals who were trained to see through exactly these kinds of deceptions. 10 minutes later, I was sitting in Nurse Hoffman's office for the second time in 2 weeks, but this time the atmosphere was entirely different. Mrs. Henderson had accompanied me and was describing what she had observed during biology class. Nurse Hoffman listened with professional detachment, taking notes and asking occasional clarifying questions. Emma, Nurse Hoffman said once Mrs. Henderson had finished her report, I'm going to need to examine the marks on your neck. Mrs. Henderson will stay here as a witness, and I'll document what I see with photographs if necessary. You can't take pictures of me without my permission, I protested, grasping for any legal protection Victoria might have mentioned. Actually, as a minor showing signs of possible abuse, I can document injuries as part of my professional responsibility, Nurse Hoffman explained calmly. But I'd prefer to have your cooperation. This process will be much easier if we can work together. I looked between the 2 women, both of whom were watching me with expressions of genuine concern mixed with professional determination. These weren't people who could be charmed or manipulated the way Victoria had learned to handle other authority figures. They had seen something, and they weren't going to pretend they hadn't. What happens if you take pictures? I asked quietly. I file a report with Child Protective Services, Nurse Hoffman said honestly. They'll investigate the situation to determine whether you're safe at home. If they find evidence of abuse, they'll work with your family to create a safety plan. If the situation is dangerous, they may recommend temporary placement with relatives or in foster care. The word foster care hit me like a physical blow. Victoria had spent 3 years telling me horror stories about the foster system, describing it as a last resort for children who had no other options. She had painted vivid pictures of overcrowded homes, neglectful caregivers, and teenagers who aged out of the system with no support or resources. I can't go into foster care, I said desperately. You don't understand. My family has a reputation in this community. My father's business, Victoria's volunteer work, this would destroy everything they've built. Emma, Mrs. Henderson said gently, maintaining your family's reputation isn't your responsibility. Protecting you is our responsibility, and we can't do that if we ignore what we've seen. Nurse Hoffman had been quietly preparing her camera while we talked. I need you to remove the turtleneck so I can see the full extent of the marks, she said professionally. I know this is uncomfortable, but it's necessary. With trembling hands, I pulled off the turtleneck, revealing the full pattern of bruises that Victoria's makeup had only partially concealed. I heard Mrs. Henderson draw in a sharp breath, and Nurse Hoffman's expression hardened as she saw the clear finger impressions around my throat. Emma, Nurse Hoffman said quietly as she began. Taking photographs. How long has this been happening? For 3 years, I had maintained Victoria's carefully constructed lies, protecting the family image and preserving the illusion of domestic harmony. But sitting in that small office, with two women who had seen through all the deception and makeup, I finally found myself unable to continue the charade. 3 years, I whispered, and with those two words, Victoria's perfect facade finally began to crumble completely. The words, 3 years, hung in the air like a confession that couldn't be taken back. Once I had spoken to them, everything that followed felt inevitable, like dominoes falling in a pattern that had been set in motion long before I was ready to acknowledge it. Nurse Hoffman finished documenting the injuries on my neck and arms, her camera clicking with clinical precision. Each photograph felt like evidence in a case I hadn't realized was being built, proof of a reality I had spent so long trying to deny even to myself. Emma, she said gently, setting down the camera, I need to ask you some specific questions. Now. I know this is difficult, but it's important that we have accurate information. Mrs. Henderson moved her chair closer to mine, creating a small circle of support that felt both comforting and terrifying. I had never spoken about Victoria's abuse to anyone, and the prospect of putting it into words felt like crossing a bridge that would burn behind me. Does your stepmother hit you regularly? Nurse Hoffman asked, her pen poised over an official-looking form. I nodded, not trusting my voice to remain steady. How often would you say this happens? 2 or 3 times a week, I whispered. Sometimes. More if I mess something up or if she's having a bad day. And your father? Does he participate in physical discipline? No, I said quickly. He doesn't hit me. He doesn't stop her. He thinks she's helping me become more responsible. Nurse Hoffman made notes as I spoke, asking follow-up questions about the types of injuries I typically sustained, where Victoria typically struck me, and how long the abuse had been escalating. Each question felt like peeling back layers of carefully constructed lies, exposing truths I had worked so hard to bury. Tell me about the makeup routine, Mrs. Henderson said quietly. We noticed that you wear more coverage than most students. Your age. The question surprised me with its specificity. I had thought Victoria's artistry was flawless, undetectable to anyone who wasn't specifically looking for signs of concealment. Every morning, I explained, my voice growing steadier. As I fell into the familiar rhythm of describing the routine. Victoria has specific products for different types of bruises. She taught me which colors neutralize which skin tones, how to blend edges so they look natural, how to set everything so it lasts all day. She taught you to cover your own injuries? Nurse Hoffman asked, her professional composure slipping slightly to reveal genuine shock. She said it was a life skill, I replied. That presentation was everything, and that successful families don't air their private business in public. The two women exchanged a look that I couldn't quite interpret, but I sensed that Victoria's approach to damage control was more unusual than she had led me to believe. Emma, Nurse Hoffman continued, has anyone else in your family or community ever suspected what was happening? Teachers, neighbors, relatives? I thought about the question carefully. I don't think so. Victoria is really good at managing how people see our family. She volunteers for everything, donates money to school programs, and she's always telling people how much she loves having me as a daughter. What about your extended family? Grandparents, aunts, uncles? My mom's parents died before I was born. I said. My dad's parents live in Florida and we only see them once a year at Christmas. Victoria always makes sure I'm presentable when they visit. Mrs. Henderson leaned forward. Emma, when you say presentable, what do you mean exactly? No. Visible bruises. Extra makeup if necessary. And I'm supposed to talk about how grateful I am for Victoria's guidance and support. The words felt mechanical as I spoke them, like reciting lines from a play I had been performing for years. Has she ever threatened you about what would happen if you told someone about the abuse? She doesn't really threaten, I said slowly, trying to find the right words to explain Victoria's psychological tactics. She just explains the consequences. Like how it would destroy my father's business if people knew our family had problems. How I would probably end up in foster care with strangers who didn't care about me. How it would be my fault if our family fell apart. Nurse Hoffman's pen had stopped moving, and she was staring at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. Emma, do you believe those things are true? The question forced me to confront assumptions I had never really examined. I don't know, I admitted. Victoria makes it sound logical when she explains it. Like she's protecting me from worse consequences. Let me be very clear about something, Nurse Hoffman said firmly. Nothing that has happened to you is your fault. Not the abuse, not the need to hide it, and not whatever consequences may come from reporting it. Adults are responsible for protecting children, not the other way around. Her words should have been comforting, but they also felt dangerous. If Victoria wasn't protecting me, if her explanations weren't accurate, then everything I had believed about my situation might be wrong. What happens now? I asked quietly. I'm required to file a report with Child Protective Services within 24 hours, Nurse Hoffman explained. They'll assign a caseworker who will investigate the situation. The caseworker will interview you, your parents, and possibly other people who know your family. Will Victoria know that I talked to you? She'll know that a report was filed, and she'll know that school personnel observed injuries consistent with abuse, Mrs. Henderson said carefully. But the specific details of our conversation are protected information. I felt a surge of panic. She'll know it was me. She'll know I broke the rules about family privacy. Emma, Nurse Hoffman said gently, you didn't break any rules. You're a minor who was being abused, and adults who observed that abuse reported it. That's how the system is supposed to work. Over the next hour, they walked me through what would happen in the coming days. The CPS caseworker would likely want to interview me at school, away from my family's influence. They would also interview my father and Victoria, probably at our home. Depending on what the investigation revealed, I might be removed from the home temporarily or permanently. Where would I go? I asked, the foster care scenarios Victoria had described flooding back into my mind. There are several options, Nurse Hoffman explained. Sometimes there are relatives who can provide temporary care. Sometimes families are willing to make changes that allow children to remain in the home safely. And yes, sometimes foster care is necessary. But you'd work to make sure I was placed somewhere safe, Mrs. Henderson added. The goal is always to protect the child, not to punish families unnecessarily. As the afternoon wore on, I felt increasingly disconnected from my own life. The Emma who had woken up that morning, carefully applying Victoria's makeup and preparing for another day of maintaining the family image, felt like a different person entirely. This new Emma, sitting in the nurse's office with documented injuries and an active CPS report, existed in a reality I wasn't sure I was ready to navigate. I need to call your father, Nurse Hoffman said eventually. I have to inform him that you'll be staying at school late today for the CPS interview, and that someone will be contacting the family soon. Can you not mention the specific reasons? I asked desperately. Maybe just say it's a routine check or something? I can't lie to your parents, Emma, but I can be general about the details until the caseworker takes over, she assured me. I watched as she dialed my father's office number, my stomach churning with anxiety about how Victoria would react to any deviation from our normal routine. The conversation was brief and professional, with Nurse Hoffman explaining that I needed to remain at school for a meeting with a counselor and that someone from social services would be contacting the family. Within the next day or two. When she hung up, she turned back to me with a concerned expression. Your father seemed more worried about how this might affect his schedule than about why social services would want to speak with your family. That sounds like him, I said sadly. Victoria handles most of the family management. He just goes along with whatever she decides. That's important information for the caseworker to have, Mrs. Henderson noted. The fact that your father may not be fully aware of what's been happening, or may be choosing not to see it. Around 4 p.m., a woman named Ms. Rachel Santos arrived at the school. She was the CPS caseworker assigned to my case, a Latina woman in her 30s with kind eyes and a professional demeanor that immediately put me somewhat at ease. She carried a leather briefcase and wore a simple business suit that suggested competence without intimidation. Hello, Emma, she said, settling into the chair that Mrs. Henderson had vacated. I'm Rachel Santos from Child Protective Services. I understand you've had a difficult day. Over the next 2 hours, Ms. Santos asked me to repeat much of what I had already told Nurse Hoffman and Mrs. Henderson, but with greater detail and specificity. She wanted to know about the progression of Victoria's abuse, the frequency and severity of incidents, and the elaborate cover-up routines that had become such a central part of my daily life. Tell me about a typical morning in your household. She requested. I described the rigid schedule, the makeup routine, Victoria's lectures about family reputation, and the constant anxiety that permeated every interaction. And your father's role in all of this? He's usually already gone to work by the time Victoria does my makeup, I explained. When he is around, Victoria is different. More maternal, I guess. She saves the discipline for when they're alone. Has your father ever seen your injuries? Sometimes. But Victoria always has explanations ready. I'm clumsy, I bruise easily, I fell down the stairs, I walked into a door. I paused, remembering dozens of creative stories Victoria had crafted over the years. She's really good at making everything sound believable. Ms. Santos made detailed notes throughout our conversation, occasionally asking me to clarify specific incidents or timelines. She was particularly interested in Victoria's psychological manipulation tactics and the way she had systematically isolated me from potential sources of support. Emma, she said finally, based on what you've told me and what I've observed in the photographs, I believe you're in danger if you return home tonight. I'm going to recommend that you be placed in emergency protective custody while we complete our investigation. The words hit me like a physical blow. Despite everything I had told them, despite the evidence documented in those photographs, part of me had still hoped that I could somehow return to the familiar routine of home, even with all its dangers. For how long? I asked, my voice barely audible. That depends on what we discover during the investigation, Ms. Santos said honestly. If your father is willing to ensure your safety and remove your stepmother from the home, you might be able to return within a few days. If not, we'll need to find a longer-term placement. As evening approached and the school building grew quiet around us, I realized that my old life was truly over. Whatever happened next, I would never again be the Emma who woke up each morning to Victoria's makeup routine, who carefully maintained the family's perfect image, who carried the weight of dangerous secrets. It was terrifying and liberating in equal measure. Ms. Santos made a phone call to arrange emergency foster placement, speaking in professional codes that I didn't fully understand. When she hung up, she turned to me with an expression that was both gentle and determined. There's a family about 20 minutes from here who specialize in emergency placements for teenagers, she explained. They're expecting you tonight. We'll stop by your house to collect some of your belongings, but I'll be with you the entire time. Do I have to see Victoria? I asked, dreading the confrontation that awaited. You'll probably see both your parents, Ms. Santos said honestly. But you won't be alone with them, and you don't have to explain or justify anything. We're simply collecting your belongings and informing them of the temporary custody arrangement. As we prepared to leave the school, Nurse Hoffman pulled me aside one final time. Emma, she said quietly, I want you to know how proud I am of your courage today. It takes incredible strength to speak the truth when you've been trained to hide it. I nodded, not trusting myself to speak without crying. And remember, she continued, this is the beginning of something better, not the end of everything you know. Sometimes we have to go through the darkness to reach the light. 20 minutes later, I was sitting in Ms. Santos's Honda Civic, watching the familiar streets of my neighborhood pass by as we drove toward a confrontation that would finally bring 3 years of secrets into the open. Victoria's perfect facade was about to meet the harsh light of official scrutiny. And I was terrified to discover what would remain when all the makeup was finally washed away. The drive to my house felt both endless and far too short. Ms. Santos kept the radio on low volume, playing soft jazz that seemed incongruous with the magnitude of what we were about to do. I sat in the passenger seat, my hands clenched in my lap, watching familiar landmarks pass by as we approached the moment I had been dreading for 3 years. Remember, Ms. Santos said as we turned onto Elm Street, you don't have to engage with them beyond basic politeness. I'll handle all the explanations and legal requirements. Your job is simply to collect what you need and stay safe. I nodded, though my throat felt too tight to speak. The sight of our house in the distance, with its perfect landscaping and pristine white columns, made my stomach clench with a mixture of fear and something that might have been grief. Despite everything that had happened within those walls, it was still the only home I had known for the past 5 years. Victoria's Mercedes was in the driveway, which meant she was home from her yoga class and afternoon errands. My father's car was there too, which was unusual for a weekday evening. Ms. Santos had clearly called ahead to ensure both parents would be present for this confrontation. Are you ready? Ms. Santos asked, turning off the engine. No, I said honestly. But I don't think I'll ever be ready for this. She smiled gently. That's perfectly normal. Sometimes the most important things we do are the ones we're not ready for. We walked up the brick pathway together, past Victoria's prized rose bushes and the seasonal mums she had planted just the week before. Everything looked exactly as it always had, picture-perfect and magazine-worthy, betraying no hint of the darkness that existed beyond the front door. Ms. Santos rang the doorbell, and within seconds, Victoria appeared. She was dressed in her typical afternoon attire, designer jeans, a cashmere sweater, and her signature pearl earrings. Her makeup was flawless, her hair perfectly styled, and her expression carefully composed into a mask of concerned confusion. Ms. Santos, I presume? Victoria said, extending her hand with the same gracious smile she used at charity functions. I'm Victoria Rodriguez. Please, come in. My husband and I are quite concerned about this unexpected visit. We stepped into the foyer, and I was immediately struck by how the house smelled, like vanilla candles and fresh flowers, the scent of carefully maintained perfection. My father appeared from the living room, still wearing his work clothes but with his tie loosened. He looked genuinely puzzled rather than worried, which told me that Victoria hadn't shared any details about why CPS might be interested in our family. Emma, my father said, moving toward me with what looked like relief. There you are. When the school called, we weren't sure what to think. Are you feeling all right? The nurse mentioned you needed to stay late for some kind of counseling session. Before I could respond, Miss Santos stepped forward. Mr. and Mrs. Rodriguez, I'm Rachel Santos from Child Protective Services. I'm here because we received a report of suspected child abuse involving Emma. I need to discuss some serious concerns with both of you. The change in Victoria's expression was subtle but unmistakable. The gracious smile remained in place, but her eyes hardened in a way I recognized all too well. My father, meanwhile, looked genuinely shocked. Child abuse, he repeated, his voice rising slightly. That's ridiculous. We love Emma. Victoria has been wonderful to her since we married. There must be some kind of misunderstanding. I understand this is difficult news, Ms. Santos said calmly. But we have documented evidence of injuries consistent with physical abuse. Emma has disclosed details about ongoing mistreatment, and school personnel have observed concerning patterns in her behavior and appearance. Victoria stepped forward, her composure still intact but with steel underneath her pleasant tone. Miss Santos, I think there's been a serious miscommunication. Emma has been struggling emotionally since her mother's death, and sometimes troubled. Teenagers make up stories to get attention or avoid consequences for their behavior. What kind of consequences? Miss Santos asked, her pen poised over her notepad. Normal household discipline, Victoria replied smoothly. Emma can be quite defiant, and we've had to establish clear boundaries about respect and responsibility. Perhaps she's mischaracterized our parenting approach to avoid taking accountability for her actions. I watched this exchange with a mixture of fascination and horror. Victoria was deploying every manipulation tactic she had perfected over the years, presenting herself as a concerned stepmother dealing with a difficult teenager. Her performance was so convincing that I could see doubt creeping into my father's expression. Dad, I said quietly, speaking for the first time since we'd entered the house. I need to get some clothes and personal things. Miss Santos says I can't stay here tonight. My father's confusion deepened. What do you mean you can't stay here? This is your home. Miss Santos intervened before I could respond. Based on our investigation, we've determined that Emma needs to be placed in protective custody while we complete our assessment. This is a temporary safety measure. Protective custody? Victoria's voice rose slightly, the first crack in her composed facade. From what exactly? We've never done anything to harm Emma. She's fed, clothed, housed, and given every opportunity to succeed. How dare you suggest otherwise? Mrs. Rodriguez, Miss Santos said firmly, Emma has finger-shaped bruises around her throat that are consistent with manual strangulation. She also has multiple bruises on her arms and torso in various stages of healing. These injuries are documented with photographs taken by the school nurse. The silence that followed was deafening. My father stared at me with an expression I couldn't quite read, while Victoria's mask finally began to slip completely. If Emma has bruises, Victoria said carefully, there are explanations for them. She's always been clumsy, and lately she's been more careless than usual. Just last week she fell down the stairs because she was rushing to answer her phone. I never fell down the stairs, I said quietly, finding my voice despite the fear coursing through me. You made that up to explain the bruises on my back from when you shoved me against the wall. Victoria's eyes flashed dangerously. Emma, that's enough. You're obviously confused and upset. Sometimes when teenagers are stressed, they misremember things or blow normal interactions out of proportion. Mrs. Rodriguez, Ms. Santos interrupted. Emma has provided detailed accounts of physical abuse spanning 3 years. She's described specific incidents, the locations where abuse typically occurred, and the elaborate makeup routines used to conceal her injuries. My father was staring at me now with something approaching recognition. The makeup, he said slowly. That's why you started wearing so much makeup. I thought Victoria was just teaching you about presentation. She was, I said, my voice growing stronger. She was teaching me how to hide what she did to me. Victoria turned on me with fury that was no longer concealed. How dare you? After everything I've done for you, every sacrifice I've made to help you become a respectable young woman, this is how you repay me? By making up vicious lies to destroy our family. They're not lies, I said firmly, surprised by my own conviction. You hit me. You've been hitting me for 3 years. You told me it was discipline, that it was for my own good, that successful families handle problems privately. But it was abuse. The word hung in the air between us, final and undeniable. For the first time in 3 years, I had named what had been happening to me, and I had done it in front of witnesses who believed me. My father looked stricken. Victoria, please tell me this isn't true. Please tell me you haven't been hurting my daughter. Victoria's composure cracked completely. Your daughter has been impossible to manage since the day we married. She's disrespectful, ungrateful, and completely lacking in discipline. Everything I did was to help her, to make her worthy of the Rodriguez name. If you had been more involved in her upbringing instead of leaving everything to me, you hit her, my father said, his voice flat with shock. You've been hitting my child. I provided correction when correction was needed, Victoria snapped. Something you were too weak to do yourself. Emma needed structure, needed to learn respect, needed to understand that actions have consequences. Ms. Santos had been taking notes throughout this exchange, documenting Victoria's admissions and defensive justifications. Mrs. Rodriguez, are you acknowledging that you physically disciplined Emma in ways that left bruises and required concealment with makeup? Victoria seemed to realize suddenly that her anger had led her to confirm everything she had been denying. This conversation is over. I want to speak with an attorney before answering any more questions. That's your right, Ms. Santos agreed. But Emma will not be returning to this home tonight, and possibly not at all, depending on what our investigation reveals. My father was still staring at me, his face pale with what looked like genuine horror. Emma, I had no idea. I swear to you, I had no idea this was happening. I wanted to believe him, but 3 years of calling out for help that never came had left me skeptical of his claims of ignorance. You saw the bruises sometimes, I said quietly. Victoria always had explanations. And you always believed her. Because I trusted her, he said desperately. Because I thought she loved you like I do. Love doesn't leave finger marks around someone's throat, Miss Santos observed quietly. Victoria, realizing that her position was becoming increasingly untenable, made one final attempt to regain control. This is all being blown out of proportion. Emma is a teenager, and teenagers exaggerate everything. Yes, I've had to discipline her, but nothing beyond what any responsible parent would do. If there have been bruises, they were accidental, the result of Emma being dramatic and overreacting to normal correction. Normal correction doesn't require daily makeup application to hide the evidence, Ms. Santos replied. And it certainly doesn't involve teaching a child to lie to medical professionals and teachers about the source of their injuries. I looked around the foyer where I had spent countless mornings being transformed from victim to perfect daughter, where Victoria had delivered her lectures about family reputation and the importance of keeping secrets. The expensive artwork, the fresh flowers, the pristine surfaces, all of it suddenly felt like props in an elaborate theater production designed to hide the truth. I need to get my things, I said, breaking the tense silence. I'll accompany you, Ms. Santos said. Take everything you think you'll need for the next week or two. As we climbed the stairs toward my bedroom, I heard Victoria and my father beginning to argue in hushed, angry tones. Their voices followed us up the staircase, but I couldn't make out specific words. I was glad not to hear whatever they were saying. I had heard enough family arguments to last a lifetime. My bedroom looked exactly as I had left it that morning, textbooks stacked on my desk, clothes laid out for the next day, photos from happier times displayed on my dresser. It felt like stepping into a museum exhibit of my former life, a space that belonged to someone I used to be. I packed quickly and efficiently, grabbing clothes, toiletries, and a few personal items that held special meaning. Miss Santos waited quietly by the door, giving me space to process what was undoubtedly a surreal experience. Take your time, she said gently when she noticed my hands shaking as I folded sweaters. This is a lot to handle all at once. As I packed, I found myself thinking about all the mornings I had sat at Victoria's vanity, watching her transform my injuries into a mask of normalcy. The makeup brushes were still arranged perfectly on the surface, the foundation bottles lined up by shade, the color-correcting palette Victoria had taught me to use with such precision. On impulse, I grabbed the small hand mirror from the vanity and looked at my reflection. Without Victoria's careful artistry, the bruises around my throat were clearly visible, dark purple marks that told the truth about what my life had really been like. For the first time in 3 years, my face showed the reality of my situation rather than the fiction we had constructed to hide it. I looked like someone who had been hurt, and strangely, that felt more honest than all the mornings I had looked like the perfect stepdaughter. When I finished packing, Miss Santos and I returned downstairs to find my father sitting alone in the living room, his head in his hands. Victoria was nowhere to be seen. Where's Victoria? I asked. She's calling her attorney, my father said without looking up. Emma, I need you to know that I never wanted this to happen. I thought she was helping you. I thought she loved you. Maybe she thought she did too, I said quietly, surprising myself with the response. But love isn't supposed to hurt like this. Miss Santos checked her watch. We need to go. The Foster family is expecting us, and it's getting late. As we walked toward the front door, my father stood up. Emma, wait. What happens now? When will I see you again? Miss Santos answered before I could. That depends on the outcome of our investigation, Mr. Rodriguez. If you're willing to ensure Emma's safety and address the issues in your household, family reunification may be possible. But that's a decision that will be made based on what's best for Emma's well-being. I looked back at the house one final time as we walked down the brick pathway. Despite everything that had happened within those walls, leaving felt like a kind of death. I was walking away from the only family I had left, toward a future that was completely uncertain, but I was also walking away from Victoria's makeup routine, from the daily ritual of hiding truth behind carefully applied concealer. Whatever came next, I would face it with my real face, marked by honesty rather than hidden behind lies. As Ms. Santos started the car, I touched the bruises on my throat gently. They hurt, but they were also proof that I had finally found the courage to speak my truth, for the first time in 3 years. That felt like a victory worth celebrating. The foster home was nothing like what Victoria had prepared me to expect. Instead of the overcrowded, institutional environment she had described in her cautionary tales, I found myself pulling into the driveway of a modest 2-story house on a quiet street lined with oak trees. Warm light glowed from the windows, and I could see children's bicycles arranged neatly on the front porch. This is the Martinez family, Miss Santos explained as we gathered my bags from the car. Carmen and David have been emergency foster parents for 8 years. They specialize in teenage placements and have experience with abuse cases. My stomach churned with nervous energy as we approached the front door. 3 years of Victoria's stories about foster care had painted vivid pictures of neglectful strangers and dangerous living conditions. Despite Ms. Santos's reassurances, I couldn't shake the fear that I was trading one form of captivity for another. The door opened before we could knock, revealing a woman in her early 40s with graying brown hair pulled back in a ponytail and kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. She was wearing jeans and a comfortable sweater, looking more like someone's favorite aunt than the cold institutional figure I had been expecting. "You must be Emma," she said warmly, extending her hand. "I'm Carmen Martinez. We're so glad you're here, though I'm sorry about the circumstances that brought you to us." Behind her appeared a man of similar age with gentle features and the kind of smile that reached his eyes. "I'm David," he said simply. "Come on in. We've got dinner ready. If you're hungry, or we can show you to your room first if you'd prefer to get settled." Miss Santos handled the official paperwork while Carmen and David gave me a tour of the house. It was comfortable without being fancy, lived in without being messy. Family photos covered the refrigerator, showing the Martinez family with various foster children over the years, teenagers of different ethnicities and backgrounds, all smiling genuinely at the camera. "We have 2 other kids staying with us right now," Carmen explained as we climbed the stairs. "Jamal is 16, been with us for about 6 months while his case works through the courts. Sophia is 14, just arrived last week. They're both good kids dealing with difficult situations." My room was small but welcoming, with pale yellow walls, a comfortable bed, and a desk positioned near the window. Someone had placed fresh flowers on the nightstand and left a basket of basic toiletries on the dresser. "The bathroom is right across the hall," David said. "You'll share it with Sophia, but she's pretty good about not hogging the mirror in the mornings." After Ms. Santos left, with promises to check in the next day, I found myself sitting at the Martinez family's kitchen table for dinner. It was such an ordinary scene, passing dishes of homemade enchiladas, listening to Jamal complain about his chemistry teacher, watching Sophia carefully separate the onions from her rice, yet it felt revolutionary after years of Victoria's rigid meal performances. "So Emma," Carmen said gently, "Miss Santos told us you're a senior. How are you feeling about finishing high school while all this other stuff is going on?" The question caught me off guard. In the chaos of the day, I hadn't thought about the practical implications of my situation. "I don't know," I admitted. "I guess I assumed I'd have to change schools or something." "Not unless you want to," David assured me. "We're in the same district as your current school. You can keep attending Maplewood High if that feels right to you. Most kids find it helpful to maintain some normalcy during transitions like this," Carmen added. "But it's completely your choice. No pressure either way." That night, I lay in the unfamiliar bed staring at the ceiling and processing the events of the day. For the first time in 3 years, I had gone to sleep without Victoria's evening inspection of my appearance, without her reminders about the next day's schedule, without the constant underlying tension that had become as familiar as breathing. The silence felt strange and peaceful in equal measure. I woke the next morning to the smell of coffee and bacon drifting up from the kitchen. For a moment, I forgot where I was and reached automatically for the makeup supplies that should have been on my nightstand. When my hand found only the small lamp Carmen had left there, reality crashed back over me. No makeup routine. No Victoria. No careful concealment of yesterday's damage. I looked at myself in the bathroom mirror and saw the same bruised face I had glimpsed the day before, but somehow it looked different in the morning light streaming through the Martinez family's windows. The marks were still dark and painful, but they no longer felt like shame I needed to hide. They were simply evidence of what I had survived. Carmen knocked softly on the bathroom door. Emma? I've got some concealer and foundation if you want to cover those bruises for school today. No pressure, but the option is there. The offer was so different from Victoria's mandatory makeup sessions that it took me a moment to process it. Carmen was giving me a choice. I could cover the bruises if it made me more comfortable, or I could leave them visible if that felt more authentic. Thank you, I called through the door. I think I'd like to try going without it today. Good for you, Carmen replied, and I could hear the smile in her voice. That takes courage. Returning to school felt surreal. I had been Emma Rodriguez, the perfectly presented stepdaughter, for so long that I wasn't sure how to be Emma Rodriguez, the abuse survivor, in the same hallways and classrooms. But as I walked through the front entrance with visible bruises and no elaborate concealer artistry, something unexpected happened. People saw me, not the carefully constructed image Victoria had created, but actually me. Teachers who had worked with me for years approached with genuine concern. Classmates who had kept their distance, interpreting my withdrawal as preference for solitude, offered support and friendship. Emma, Jessica Chen said during first period chemistry, I heard about what happened. If you need notes from any classes you missed, or if you just want someone to sit with at lunch, I'm here. Even Marcus Thompson, who had tried to reach out weeks earlier, found me between classes. My mom heard through her CPS contacts that you're okay, he said quietly. I'm really glad you got help. But the most meaningful response came from Nurse Hoffman, who called me to her office during my free period. I wanted to check in and see how you're doing, she said, studying my face with professional concern. How are the Martinez family treating you? Really well, I said honestly. Better than I expected. They're giving me choices about things I never realized I could choose for myself. And how does it feel to be at school without concealer? I thought about the question carefully. Scary but honest. Like I'm finally showing people who I really am instead of who Victoria wanted them to see. Nurse Hoffman smiled. That's exactly what healing looks like, Emma. It's not about hiding the damage or pretending it didn't happen. It's about integrating your experiences into an authentic sense of self. Over the following weeks, as the CPS investigation progressed, I learned more about the legal process and my options for the future. Ms. Santos visited regularly to update me on the case and check on my adjustment to foster care. Your stepmother has been charged with child abuse, she informed me during one visit. Your father is cooperating with the investigation, but he's also facing charges for failure to protect a minor. The district attorney believes there's sufficient evidence for prosecution. What does that mean for me? I asked. It means you'll likely need to testify at some point, but that's still months away, Ms. Santos explained. In the meantime, we need to make decisions about your long-term placement. My father had requested supervised visitation, which Ms. Santos thought was appropriate given his cooperation with the investigation. The first meeting was scheduled for the following week at the CPS offices, with a counselor present to facilitate the conversation. How do you feel about seeing him? Carmen asked as we discussed the upcoming visit over dinner. I don't know, I admitted. Part of me misses him, but part of me is still angry that he let it happen for so long. Both of those feelings can be true at the same time, David observed. Relationships with family members are complicated, especially when there's been trauma involved. The visit with my father was awkward and emotional. He looked older than I remembered, with new lines around his eyes and a defeated posture that suggested the weight of his guilt. We sat across from each other in a small conference room while a family counselor named Dr. Patricia Williams facilitated our conversation. Emma, my father began, his voice rough with emotion, I need you to know how sorry I am. I failed you. In the most fundamental way a parent can fail a child. I was supposed to protect you, and instead I enabled someone who was hurting you. I listened as he explained how Victoria had gradually isolated him from my daily care, how she had convinced him that her approach to discipline was necessary and effective, how he had chosen to trust her judgment rather than pay closer attention to what was happening in his own home. I'm not making excuses, he said firmly. I'm just trying to help you understand how I could have been so blind to what was right in front of me. Did you really not see the bruises? I asked quietly. He was quiet for a long moment. I saw them, he finally admitted. But Victoria always had explanations, and I wanted to believe her explanations more than I wanted to investigate further. I was taking the easy path, and I'm ashamed of that. Dr. Williams helped us navigate the difficult conversation about accountability, forgiveness, and the possibility of rebuilding our relationship. My father expressed genuine remorse and a commitment to whatever counseling or legal requirements would be necessary to regain my trust. I don't expect you to forgive me right away, he said as our session neared its end. But I hope someday you'll give me the chance to be the father I should have been all along. Meanwhile, my life at the Martinez house was developing its own rhythm. I helped with dinner preparations, did homework at the kitchen table alongside Jamal and Sophia, and gradually began to feel like part of a functional family system. Carmen and David treated me with respect and kindness while maintaining appropriate boundaries and expectations. "You're blooming," Carmen observed one evening as we worked together on a jigsaw puzzle. "It's like watching someone come alive after being held underwater for too long." The metaphor felt accurate. For 3 years, I had been holding my breath, surviving in an environment that was slowly suffocating my authentic self. At the Martinez house, I was learning to breathe again. 3 months after leaving my father's house, I made a decision that surprised even me. I asked Ms. Santos about the possibility of staying with the Martinez family permanently, even if my father's situation improved enough to allow for reunification. "Are you sure about that?" she asked. "Your father has been working hard in counseling, and he's genuinely committed to making changes." "I know," I said. "And I'm proud of him for doing that work. But I think I need to build my own life now, separate from the family dynamics that allowed the abuse to happen. Carmen and David are willing to let me stay through graduation and help me with college applications. They feel like family now." Ms. Santos nodded thoughtfully. "That's a very mature decision, Emma. It shows real insight into what you need to heal and thrive." The conversation with my father about my decision was difficult but necessary. We met again in Dr. Williams's office, and I explained my reasoning as gently as I could. "I love you, Dad," I said, my voice steady despite the tears in my eyes. "But I need to build a life that's mine, not one that's defined by what happened to me or by trying to fix what went wrong before." He cried openly as I spoke, but he also listened with the kind of attention I had always craved from him. "I understand," he said finally. "And I respect your decision. I just hope we can maintain some kind of relationship as you build this new life." "I'd like that too," I agreed. "But as equals, not as parent and child trying to pretend the past didn't happen." 6 months after leaving Victoria's house, I sat in Carmen's kitchen working on my college application essays. The prompt asked me to describe a challenge I had overcome and how it had shaped my goals for the future. I started writing about makeup. But not the kind Victoria had taught me to apply. I wrote about the makeup of a life, how sometimes we have to strip away all the false colors we've been wearing to discover who we really are underneath. I wrote about the courage it takes to show your true face to the world, even when that face bears scars. Most importantly, I wrote about the difference between hiding damage and healing from it, between maintaining an image and building an identity. As I typed the final sentences of my essay, I realized that Victoria had taught me something valuable after all, though not what she had intended. She had taught me the importance of truth by showing me the exhausting cost of living a lie. For the first time in years, I looked forward to tomorrow without fear, without the need to conceal anything, without the weight of secrets that weren't mine to carry. I was finally free to be exactly who I was, bruises and all. Looking for more? We've got 2 amazing stories ready for you right on screen. If this one touched you, these are absolutely worth your time. Click to watch them now. And hey, subscribe and hit that bell to never miss our latest uploads.